Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session Love and Revolution, Faiz by Ali Madeeh Hashmi, and Over My Shoulder by Alys Faiz. Our moderator for this session is Aisha Sarwari. She's a development specialist and gender rights activist. She has experience of both the private and public sectors in the US and Pakistan. In the development sector, she has worked with USAID's Competitive Support Fund, under which she was posted in the Pakistan Board of Investment. She has also worked with USAID's Agribusiness Project and the USAID Training for Pakistan Project. Over to you.
We know Alys Faiz as a wife and a mother. We hardly know of her as being among the first women to nudge at the glass ceiling and excel as what we often patronizingly refer to as a working woman in Pakistan. She fell in love with Faiz in Amritsar, India. Their mutual love of Shakespeare brought them together.
छोटी सी बारात थी, तीन आदमी थे, एक तो फैज साहब and his younger brother Ahmed and a political friend. They arrived in the evening, tired and dusty. तो पहले मैंने फैज से पूछा था, आप अंगूठी लेके आए हैं? तो क्या जरूर लेके आया हूँ। मैंने कहा तुम्हारे पास पैसे कहाँ थे? तुम्हारे पास पैसे भी नहीं थे। तो कहने लगे मैंने तो मेरे इफ्तिखारुद्दीन से कर्ज लिया था, खैर वापस तो देना नहीं मैंने। तो मैंने कहा साइज का पता था? कहने लगी हाँ तुम्हारी जैसी। तो मैंने ट्राई किया था, नहीं मैंने ट्राई नहीं किया, मैंने कहा नो दैट्स बैड लक टू ट्राई बिफोर द मैरिज, तो आई डिडंट ट्राई द रिंग। शाम को दावत हुई थी, बहुत बड़ी दावत हुई थी, और इसलिए के बाद से शायर लोग आए हुए थे, एक मुशायरा भी हुआ था।
Her commitment to Faiz made her move to Pakistan, a place she adopted as her home. Her love for Faiz was put through a trying time when he was put behind bars in 1951. Not only did she become his rock emotionally, she also became his patron.
बहुत देर की बात है, लेकिन ऐसे मालूम होता कि कल की बात थी। सुबह के वक्त था, कोई 5 बजे, और कुछ आवाज आई थी नीचे से, तो मैं उठी थी, हम ऊपर वाले फ्लैट में बैठे थे। So I got up and I looked over the veranda, and there I saw about 50 armed policemen. तो मैंने फैज से कह दिया कोई वेट हो रहा है, किस लिए? तो उन्होंने कहा मुझे नहीं पता। उस समय में 1951 पंजाब के इलेक्शंस हो रहे थे, तो उन्होंने सोचा था कि किसी वजह से गिरफ्तार करने आए थे। तो हमारे ऊपर वाले फ्लैट है, तो हम नीचे जाके दरवाजा खोल दिया, तो वो ऊपर आए थे। They all stood at attention all the way around the flat, everywhere, opened the doors and pushed in. तो मैंने उनसे पूछा था कि आपके कोई वारंट है सर्च करने के लिए? तो कहने लगे वारंट तो आ ही जाएगा। मैंने कहा दिखा दे, तो उन्होंने कहा नहीं हमारे इस वक्त कोई नहीं है। तो when the DIG or whatever he was, I don't remember, he came, तो उसने कहा था कि वो फैज साहब कहाँ है? तो फैज साहब निकले, वो जरा सा कुछ पहन के शॉर्ट पहन के आए थे, मार्च 9 था। तो ने पूछा था कि आपको ले जाने के लिए आए हैं? तो फैज ने पूछा था व्हाट फॉर, व्हाट बाय डन? ये सब आपको पता लग जाएगा।
All the pettinesses and jarrings have gone, and I love now for what I believe to be right and honest. It seems now that I shall have to cope with the expenses of the trial. I hope that you are well. The journey together to your fortress. We need the trip to laugh a little. There have been enough tears, as you say, and we have none left. Your book is now going into a second edition. It has gone very well indeed. Bless you, dearest heart. And when the President makes his announcement, my hand will be in yours, and I shall press it gently. Nothing else will matter. The rest is love and waiting, and the future and its dreams. And when I water the green shoots each morning, I do weep a little for the magic and beauty of it all. And then I don't have to weep for your lonely girls and separation, for father or for your mother, or for years lost and dreary work unending. Because tears which might have been shed in sadness have been shed for the joy of what we live for, whether for green shoots. The CID has described me as Faiz Ahmed Faiz, female.
She was not just a prolific writer and a vociferous activist, she was also a fierce believer in women's and children's rights. The woman behind Faiz was Alys. The person behind Alys was herself.
I think your children will be among those without stigmas. They have never seen us cheating, being corrupt, or even lying. We are just waiting for you to return from across the darkness of separation. We shall have so much to make up, so much to remember, so much to forget.
Alys Faiz died on March 12, 2003 and has been laid to rest next to Faiz Ahmed Faiz in Model Town, Lahore, the city of the Lawrence Gardens she loved so much. Theirs was perhaps the most endearing love story of this era.
The ladies, who were few, sat together in a state royal anteroom. The most excited among them was Salima, my small niece. "You're going to be married?" "Yes." "Will you make babies then?" "Perhaps." "Please do. I want to play with them." It all seemed so make-believe, remote from real life. A Rani's palace above the dull lake, a sari of spun gold thread, Tasir's mother, beautiful, calm, smiling to herself, smoking her hookah, Rafi Pir's sister, her daughters, waiting, whispering, "What kind of marriage is it? No procession? Oh, no band? Shh, shh." The door opens and Sheikh Abdullah stands in the doorway. Tall, so imposing. He crosses the room in measured tread. He bows low in greeting to Tasir's mother. She lowers her head in salutation. He bends over me and takes my hand in his, and then speaks gently in Urdu, then in English, perhaps too in Kashmiri. Of this I'm a little unsure. He asks me in the Muslim traditional manner to give my consent. I do so. The contract is made, patterned on the contract between my sister and Dr. Tasir, written up by Sir Muhammad Iqbal. By chance or design, both Josh and Majaz were house guests, and the splendid Kashmiri feast was followed by a mushaira. Faiz and I boated on Dal Lake, met friends, and then bade farewell to the beauties of Kashmir. We had little money. The cost of the wedding ring had been met by Mian Iftikharuddin as a loan, which I shan't repay, said Faiz. So Faiz, Josh, Majaz and I set out for Rawalpindi by bus. The other two members of the little wedding party had left earlier. We paid 2 or 3 rupees each for back row seats in the bus, but a concession was made in my case. I sat behind the driver. And thus we covered the long miles between Srinagar and Rawalpindi. Onwards to Lahore, we counted our money again. Enough for 3 interclass tickets and 1 sleeper for me. And so it was. The 3 poets nodded through the night. At Rawalpindi, I retired to bedeck myself as a bride again, changing my travelling sari. I had yet to be received in the traditional manner by the family. A friend was to meet us with a car. The women in the ladies' room stood agape as I changed. They even offered to help. A strange sadness overcame me. I remember I did so want to remain as I was. No gold, no covering of the head, no dangling earrings. Oh, my shoes let me down. We had missed out on them. They weren't wedding shoes at all, as the ladies pointed out. And so I arrived to face the family. Seated on a stool, surrounded by venerable elders from the village, bearded, henna-haired, small nieces and nephews, cousins and their daughters, sisters-in-law, half-sisters, all pushing, laughing, screaming, trying to peep at my face under my veil, gazing into those foreign blue eyes. They touched the tips of my painted nails, traced the lines of henna on my hands, the work of Salima and her ayah. The Quran was put into my hands, and my venerable mother-in-law blessed me after her own fashion and named me Kulsum. My costume for the following day, a red Punjabi costume, was placed in my lap, together with a wide traditional red veil edged with silver and a heavy fringe. Saris were brought out as gifts, dark green with gold thread, silk, printed, plain, and I wondered why these kind people needed to spend so much on me, so far to them, a stranger. Then, as Faiz had warned me, came the traditional family fit. This occurs at many marriages. This time, the neurotic sister sank to the floor. I was petrified with fear and then tried to get to her to help her. Oh, I was told not to worry by an English-speaking niece, and that this was her act every time someone was married or died or on some similar occasion. Face slapping went on, water was poured, she choked, screamed, and was soon on her feet. You see, said the niece, it's nothing. You get used to it. I have done over the years. Now the groom's feast must be worried over. We retired at last to an upstairs room, only to be hailed by Sufi Tabassum, the Persian scholar and teacher, who was in charge of preparations for the feast the next day. So the morning wore on until the time of the groom's feast. I dressed in the brilliant scented Punjabi dress, was again adorned with jewels by 2 nieces and led, head downcast and covered, into the sitting room. I sat on a very low stool for what seemed hours, while women and girls came, peeped, some glowed with satisfaction, some looked awfully disappointed, others looked just nothing at all. Gifts were placed in my lap, piled around me, and rupees pressed into my hennaed hands. A cigarette box, which I still have, was Ismat Iftikharuddin's gift. I thought that everybody had forgotten that a bride too must eat, which they had. Until at last, I was whisked away from the clamour to Sufi Tabassum's house to be by myself, to eat and to look back upon all that had so far been, and to look forward to what? I did not know. But it was soon agreed that the house near the Ravi was not the place for an English bride, and so arrangements were made soon to be made to cart us all, bag and baggage, to a house on the other side of town. And there began another story.
Thank you. That was Navid Shahzad. A little about her. Navid Shahzad is an actor, poet, a journalist, and a TV pioneer. Having taught English literature at the Punjab University for 3 decades, she was the head of Pakistan's School of Fashion Design for 5 years, following which she served as the Dean, School of Liberal Arts, Beacon House, National University, Lahore. Her company, Theatre Wale, regularly produces dramatic performances, the latest being the performance of an Urdu translation of Shakespeare's Taming the Shrew, performed at the Global Theatre London in 2012. At present, she's the academic advisor at the Lahore Grammar School. In 2003, she was awarded the President's Pride of Performance Award for her contribution to the literature and the arts of Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, let me formally welcome you here today to discuss and talk about two amazing people, Faiz Ahmed Faiz and Alys Faiz. We're dividing today's session into 2 parts. The first is going to be on Alys Faiz's book called Over My Shoulder, published by Sangamil, and the second part is going to be about Ali Madeeh Hashmi's book on Faiz Ahmed Faiz called Love and Revolution, published by Rupa. My guest with me for the first session is going to be Ms. Nasreen Azhar. I'd like her to please come up on the stage. Ms. Nasreen Azhar is a well-known women's rights and human rights activist and an independent development consultant. She is the founder member of Women's Action Forum and a member of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan since its inception. She has wide-ranging work experience in journalism, adult literacy, research, rights-based social development. She was appointed member of the National Commission on the Status of Women from 2009 to 2012, and she won the Shahid Benazir Bhutto Human Rights Award in 2010. Welcome, Ms. Navid Shahzad and Nasreen Azhar. So we've seen the film and we've seen who Alys Faiz was, known mostly as the quintessential companion of Faiz Ahmed Faiz. She was a British-born leftist. She came to the subcontinent to witness the partition, and she stayed on because she fell in love with Faiz Ahmed Faiz. From the point where she stayed as a single mom during the time Faiz Ahmed Faiz was put up in jail on fictitious charges, to the time she was dodging bombs in Beirut. The one thing about Alys Faiz that has always strongly come out is her indomitable will and her ability to take things in stride. My first question to you would be, who is Alys Faiz to you particularly?
Well, first, of course, when I met Alys Faiz, she was introduced to me as the wife of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, but I soon found she was very much, in her own right, a person one had to respect. She was an amazing woman. I am fortunate that I knew her, and I was a young woman in Lahore when I first met her. And she was the person who, in my opinion, gave Faiz Sahab the space and the strength to carry on with the work. I mean, it's amazing how she put up with all the difficulties that came her way, the financial difficulties, all the jail terms that Faiz Sahab had to endure, and how she kept him strong, she kept herself strong, she looked after her children and the house with whatever resources, and she was very proud. She insisted on being on her own, being independent, took on a job with the Pakistan Times and brought up her children.
Now, when I was first exposed to Alys Faiz's writings, the one thing that really struck me was, obviously she's a very articulate woman. She's very strong. There was a sense of pride.
That's right. She writes beautifully.
She writes beautifully. I mean, I've yet to see that kind of strong writing, and some writers even today. But she came across to me as sort of a very staunch feminist. Perhaps the word wasn't very popular back then, right? As it is today.
Wasn't.
Yeah. What defines and what's the difference between the feminism of Alys Faiz and the feminism that we see today?
Well, I don't know. Many of the problems are still there, actually. I just think what is different today is that there is a greater sense of awareness. The media is more aware, even the judiciary, that it took a long time for them to become aware, but they are more aware, and the public at large. I find young women today are much more aware than they were in those days.
One of the things that I also noticed in sort of her feminism is that she didn't have an issue reconciling the caregiver aspect, obviously the support that she gave Faiz Saab and the house and everything, and her amazing ability to maintain her individual self as a separate, independent, opinion-making woman. How did you see that balance? Because it's hard. It's very difficult to have that balance.
But I always met her. She was always cheerful, she was always strong, and she was interested in whatever was happening. And it's only now that when I read her book, I realized what she must have gone through and what Moneeza and Salima must have gone through. Of course, one sensed, but didn't know her at that time in the early days. But when I met her, she was a strong woman, and she was a dedicated women's rights activist. She was a member of the Anjuman Jamhuriyat Pasand Khawateen, the Democratic Women's Association, and in that capacity, with her communist background, she and Tahira Mazhar Ali and other women then, they formed the Women's Peace Committee in 1949. And this peace committee, took up the issues of peace and democracy, and in other words, what they were saying, that women have an equal voice in what goes on in society. Their issues are not confined to marriage and children and divorce and so on, but that, all issues are women's issues, as we say now. And then she was a founder member of Women's Action Forum. She was a council member of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, and in every capacity, when she wrote for The Viewpoint, she was a correspondent for The Viewpoint, a columnist, and she wrote about women's rights. She wrote about children's rights. She wrote about health and education and social justice and rights of the poor. So she took up she had a very strong commitment to people, and especially to poor people and to women and children.
So we've seen that she's an ardent humanist, she's a feminist, she's a child's rights activist, she's a prolific writer, she supported Faiz Saab in his dreams. She did amazing things. I mean, the list goes on. But the question remains, what is the source of her indomitable will?
I think her very, very strong commitment, her strong commitment to social justice and to justice at every level, and to human rights. In the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, when she became a council member, she was one of the first to volunteer for fact-finding missions, and she then resigned from the council in order to be more active as a staff member. She became a staff member of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, and she insisted that all the male staff members should treat their women with respect and give them the rights which they proclaimed they believed in. And her presence in the office had a very good effect on the entire staff.
आपने ये बात की है, so I remembered a piece of writing that she had when she just joined the office, and she complained to the staff that there was not a women's washroom, and it just goes back to define how difficult it was for working women in that day and age to stand on her feet, to make ground for herself, so it just shows how archaic things were back then, and yet it did not stop her, it did not deter her. So
that's right, she fought for her rights. And when I think how she cycled, took her children to school
in the summer Lahore heat,
yes,
right?
Yes, and how she stood by Faiz during those horrible times in Beirut. I've been to Beirut as a university student, and I could just imagine, the Israelis there shelling, and she was there And she was a pillar of strength to him, and withstood all that, and then wrote about it so beautifully. It's so moving.
I
Her
think
experiences in Beirut.
It's on this page 88, where she talks about the Israeli shelling and how she was without a map. Faiz Saab told her, take a map with you, and she said, no, I'm fine, I'll figure it out. And she was literally dodging Israeli bombs in
That's
Beirut.
right.
And she was talking about the Syria-led sort of fights, and it almost seems like nothing's changed. I mean, the same processes and the same fights are happening even today.
Yes, they only seems almost worse now, because there's the conflict around the world has now spread out all through the Middle East.
Just one last question before we move to a bit of a reading. Can you summarize Alys Faiz for me, particularly with regard to how does her relationship with Faiz Saab fit in? And the title of the book is Over My Shoulder. So how does that work? Can you summarize for me?
Well, I was trying to think why she named that book Over My Shoulder. And it's that she's, to me it means that she's looking back on all that's happened. And she's of course put it together so eloquently in that book. But I think that, as I said, if without her, Faiz Saab may not have been Faiz Saab, because she was the pillar of strength behind him, She gave him the space when he used to socialize and come to events and meet people. She was there in the background. She let him, there were great, demands, Faiz Saab, wo sunao, ye sunao. And then he would recite his poetry, and she just sat there quietly and listened. I mean, I think it would have been very difficult for him to be the great man he was without her.
I think the film summarized it interestingly. It said the person behind Faiz Saab was Alys Faiz, and the person behind Alys Faiz was herself.
That's correct. That's correct.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll end at that note. There's so much to talk about, but before we kind of wrap up the session, I would request Ms. Navid Shahzad to read at least one poem of Alys Faiz, just to give us a flavor of her other styles of writing.
Somebody sent me a letter on peace. Join us, it said. Are you with us or are you not? My mind tripped over Hiroshima bombs and Mon Amour, third-generation rotting teeth with sterile bodies, deformities, a survivor's story, crawling through molten ash, pushing aside bits and pieces of what had been joyous life, leaping feet, waving hands, living, though minus a function or two and a limb, to write it down. Not exactly write, but scratch and scrawl and utter staccato sounds passing for speech. Am I with him as he unfolds the heinous trail of madmen leading me on page after page through leaden light, in and out of darkness, deeper darkness, bone, hair, teeth, no flesh. Ah, Japanese writer who scratches and crawls in the name of peace. Am I with you?
Thank
and
you.
my favorite poem. Stand tall like a man. Take the hand of your woman, no leaning, no lagging behind in the shadow of your footsteps. You breathed life into her. She begat, she labored in travail, and the wonder of life came from her womb. Stand tall like a man, take her hand, coarsened by toil, bless her dragging footsteps, lift her chin, straighten the curve of her shoulders, bowed down by the infamous oppression of centuries of misery and suffering. Take her hand, raise it to your lips, bend down to her brow, push back her straggling hair, reveal her eyes, cast away their shadows of despair, look deep into them. Together, stand tall as man and woman, equal in the eyes of all men.
This wraps up the first part of our session. I'd like to really thank Ms. Nasreen Azhar for your, information about the great Alys Faiz. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
For our next session, we're going to request Mr. Ali Madeeh Hashmi to please come on stage. Dr. Ali Madeeh Hashmi is a psychiatrist, a writer, a translator who practiced and taught psychiatry in the USA for 12 years. He's a graduate of King Edward Medical College, Lahore, and Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. His essays about mental health, literature, poetry, and history have been published in scientific journals, magazines, newspapers, and literary journals in Pakistan, India, and the United States. His most recent book, Love and Revolution, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, the authorized autobiography, has just been published. He's an associate professor of psychiatry at King Edward Medical University in Lahore and a trustee of the Faiz Foundation Trust, Pakistan, and the president of the Faiz Foundation, Inc., USA. So welcome, Ali. Let me ask you the first thing that came to my mind. But before that, let's move on to a film.
जैसे वीराने चुपके से बाहर आ जाए, जैसे सहरा जैसे बीमार को बेवजह करार आ जाए।
So welcome, Ali, again. This is said to be an authorized biography. What is different about a biography and an authorized biography?
I think the main difference is that there are biographies which are not written without the permission or without the consent or without the participation of the subject or the subject of the biography or their families. So since this has been commissioned by the family, so to speak, I guess I did it on my own, but they let me do it. So so that's kind of why. And then the publishers thought it would be nice to include that in the title, in order to sort of support the authenticity of the account, I suppose.
I was reading your bio and I was thinking, so you do poetry, you do psychiatry, you are Faiz Foundation trustee, etc., etc. How do you write? Where did the passion to write come from, and how do you find time to fit it in your schedule?
Well, the passion is a genetic illness, so to speak. My doctor friends, some of whom are here today, and I'm very thankful to all of them, have pointed that out. So I started writing when I was about 13 or 14 actually. My mother was the editor of She magazine, a little plug for She, I think it's still around. And so I just enjoy it. So one always finds time to do the things that one likes doing. So that's
Would it be accurate to say that you found your voice in a women's magazine?
I never quite thought of it like that, but yes, I did find my voice in a women's magazine, so I am the proto-feminist. That's who I am.
You mentioned, we were talking about the authorized biography. You mentioned authenticity. How does a loved one write objectively about another loved one?
Well, this question comes up fairly often. There's no such thing as ultimate objectivity. Everybody has a point of view. And so when you write about any personality, you obviously start out from your own point of view. You clearly, if you want to write an authentic account, you don't want it to be too laudatory, I guess, because it becomes just a account of praising the person. But then you don't want it to be character assassination either. So you try to tread the middle line. We had a book launch in Lahore the other day, and somebody asked me that, and to my mind, why would you want to write about something that or someone that you don't like? What's the point? Because where would the passion come from unless you had like a passionate hatred for your subject, which seems kind of silly.
People do that, by the way.
Well, I don't want to. This was a concern when I was writing the biography, because I didn't want it to be just an account of all the good qualities and all of this, which obviously there are several. So I tried to make an effort to include some critical accounts of his poetry or his ideology or whatever, and readers can decide if that comes through. So,
the most obvious question again is, what were sort of the best parts about this book? I was reading it. It's, by the way, in a very easy to read language. It kind of grips you right in the beginning. Faiz Saab's personality is strong enough to carry the narrative forward, but the style of writing is also very important, and it was exactly that. It kind of like, before I knew it, I was at the end. What were the best parts?
I think the best part was spending a lot of time with him, because writing is the ultimate solitary pursuit, and there's nobody else around. But he was around and she was around, Mama, and he was there. So that helped. That was nice. And then, of course, it's something that I like doing, something that I'd wanted to do. It was difficult going at times. It took about 2.5 years altogether. And it's very nice to be able to sit here and for people to appreciate what I've done. But this is sort of an anticlimax, actually, because once you finish the work, you realize that was the real fun part. Now, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do next. So,
did you prescribe anything for yourself?
Did I prescribe something to myself? I think I'll keep that secret. So.
And Ali, what were the difficult parts?
The most difficult part was collecting all the references, doing the research. I started doing this, the idea actually germinated before 2011. 2011 was his centenary year, and we had a big celebration for that and all this. And that's when the biography was commissioned by the publisher. I started it. The first chapter is about his death and his funeral, because I remember that reasonably well. I was almost 16 at the time, and he was in Lahore, and he died in Mayo Hospital, which is where I teach now. So I wrote that chapter, and I think it turned out pretty well. Then I wrote the next one. The next one I started with actually an account of Faiz's father. And then I finished 2 chapters, and I had nothing else to write, really. I had nothing to, I didn't know what to write, and I didn't know where to go to find the material to write it. So for about 6 or 8 months, I didn't write anything because I didn't know what to write. And then luckily I was fortunate to run into a young man who's, we've become good friends, who was at that time doing his PhD on Faiz. He's now teaching in Jung, and so he and I got together. He volunteered to collect the references and do the research for me, and did a wonderful job. And so everybody's praised the thoroughness of the research, and the credit for all of that goes to him. And so once he collected all the material, we sat down and we threshed out the rest of the chapters, and after that it just became a matter of sort of filling in the blanks. And of course 2013 is when our friend Mazhar Jameel Saab's Urdu biography Zikr Faiz came out. And Mother Saab was kind enough to send me an earlier draft of the book, and so I used some of that material. And so, the difficult part was not the writing. The difficult part was finding the material to put it together as a coherent narrative. But it finally came together, so that's good.
Does the book answer this question, which I've always had ever since I've read Faiz Saab, that he's written considerably less compared to other subcontinent writers, like in terms of the volume of work, and yet he is the region's finest and most loved poet? Why?
Why don't you ask the audience? I mean, I like him. You know, I have a chapter, right? The last chapter is about the popularity of his poetry. And so there's some, you know, this is, you know, my own account of it. The poetry is very easy to understand. It addresses, you know, contemporary concerns. It talks about things that many of us, you know, find relevant. You know, it's really, his poetry is a chronicle of Pakistan's history in a way. I mean, he's written poems to commemorate various anniversaries and national days and so on. So I think that's part of it, the popularity part. You know, I think a big part is the way he was. I mean, and you know, this is all in the book, but you know, it's difficult to find. It really was difficult to find anyone who had said something like bad about him, because he would never respond to criticisms. He would never respond to even vicious personal attacks on his, you know, his integrity and his persona and his ideology. He just wouldn't. He just.
I think I did read the fact that there was one person who actually claimed that Faiz Saab got all his ideas from him, and to even him, he just, you know, he never responded negatively
and you know,
to anybody.
If somebody had said that to Faiz Saab's face, he would say, "Haan, bhai, theek hai." That's just the way he was. And so, you know, it helps when you have a personality like that, because it makes you very easy to like. It really does. And then and of course, he was a master poet. He really was. I mean, he knew poetry inside and out, and he, you know, he was, you know, so the poetry technically is very, very sound.
And the poetry was his best defense for anything, anywhere, right?
Right. And he said that. He said, I've quoted that in the book. He said, you know, there's just no point responding to personal attacks, because you can use that energy to do something creative, something better, instead of engaging in, you know, back and forth with people who are trying to pick a fight with you. So.
There's so much to ask about a man as great as Faiz Saab. Obviously, is he, by the way, how would you define him? A complex man or a simple man? Like, if you were to choose between the two?
You know, you ask very interesting questions. So first we'd have to, you know, I think anybody who's well-read and anybody who has the breadth of knowledge and the depth of knowledge that Faiz Saab did, I mean, it would be difficult to call them simple in the sense that, you know, you can converse with them on anything under the sun and they can do it in an intelligent way. So I guess that would attest to their complexity. But on the other hand, once you have that breadth and depth of knowledge, then you can really focus on life the way it is, instead of getting lost in the way things should be, or the way things were, or the way things ought to be, so on and so forth. So I guess both. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist. We never answer questions. We just answer questions with more questions. So.
No, I think it's accurate in the sense that his depth of knowledge and you know, the ability to synthesize complex ideas gave him the articulation to be simple in his, you know, explanation.
Yes, that's a very good point, because of course he was asked to speak on things like, you know, Faiz Saab, Pakistan ka kya hoga? That, I mean, you know, just, you know, so of course his response after he took a puff of his cigarette was, bhai, hame शक है कि पाकिस्तान ऐसे ही चलता रहेगा. So yeah, I think I've quoted that in the book. एक और जगह पे किसी ने कहा जी कोई बड़े वो कोई किसी पार्टी के बड़े कारकुन थे, गर्मा गर्म कोई, you know, रेड कारकुन थे, तो उन्होंने कहा फैसला इनकलाब कब आएगा? तो उन्होंने कहा भाई आ जाएगा, अभी आपकी उम्र ही क्या है? So, you know, but, you know, on a serious note, you know, to be able to understand politics and philosophy and you know, political evolution, so on and so forth, I think your point is exactly right, that if you have a deep study of that, then it's easy to simplify it in your answers. If you understand it, if you know what it's about, then that makes it easier.
I want to request Ms. Navid Shahzad to read a portion of your book, but right before you give me a one-sentence summary of who Faiz Saab is.
My grandfather, how about that? Only 2 words.
Ali, to add to what has already been said about your book, and I've been through it cover to cover, I think it's one of the most densely researched books that I've ever come across. Congratulations. Faiz had been arrested, and no one had any idea where he was or why he had been arrested. Despite the best efforts of Alys and his friends to get some news of his whereabouts, there was no sign of Faiz anywhere. The police and intelligence agencies flatly denied that he was in their custody. With each passing day, Alys's apprehensions were mounting. This was compounded by the terrible rumors that soon started flying that Faiz was being kept in the notorious dungeons of Lahore Fort, that he was being tortured, that he'd been blinded by his torturers. Moreover, Alys was afraid that some of these rumors would reach Bebeji, Faiz's mother. It was all she could do to control her panic. On the other hand, with each passing day, as the government failed to produce the conspirators or lay any formal charges against them, the mood of the people was turning against the government and in favor of Faiz. Salima and Moneeza were at the time studying in the prestigious Queen Mary School. The girls were happy there, but there was no question of being able to afford their fees now. They were taken out and admitted to the Kinnaird Mission High School, where fees were lower, but the educational standards still good. In addition, the principal, an English woman, was sympathetic to Alys. Bebeji started sending wheat, rice, vegetables, and cooking ghee from the village, and other family members helped to get daily groceries like bread, milk, and sugar at discounted rates. There was still no sign of Faiz. Several other workers and team members of Pakistan Times had also been arrested, including Mazhar Ali Khan, its acting editor in Faiz's absence. Paradoxically, the readership of the newspaper had grown enormously since the arrests, which had emboldened those staff members who had not been arrested, including Alys. It had also increased their workload manifold. Alys, by virtue of her command over English, also had the responsibility of reading and editing the reports sent in from the field. Around this time, she also decided to complete her graduation. Lahore is a beautiful city. Wide streets are lined by lush green trees, and the entire city is dotted with parks. The only thing that the denizens of Lahore fear is its summer, when the temperatures climb to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and stays there for months on end. Everything wilts under the sun's fierce gaze. Then the rains come, and after a brief respite, the humidity climbs along with the heat and the city turns into a sauna. It's hard enough for natives of the Punjab to deal with the heat. For an English woman, it must have been excruciating. In one of his letters to Alys from jail, later, during his imprisonment, Faiz writes, "When I read of Lahore's temperature in the newspaper, my heart aches. Then I imagine you sitting in an oven-like office, sweat flowing, the children walking home in the summer sun, and the long, sweltering evenings crushing the body and spirit like a dead weight. I'm aware of all these responsibilities that you are bearing alone, from which there is no immediate escape, no rest, just an endless burden of toil without reward or remuneration. I know all this, and I have no words to comfort you, except that every journey has an end, and as long as one is alive, there is a future." For 3 months, there was no news of Faiz, where he was or who was holding him. At last, a letter arrived from the district jail at Lalpur, now Islamabad, stating that Faiz had been kept in solitary confinement in Lalpur jail and he had now received permission to see the family. He had asked for Alys and the girls to come see him. Salima recounts the moment when she heard the news. "I came home from school one day and saw Mummy unusually happy. As soon as she saw me, she exclaimed, 'Your father's alive!' I screamed with joy. 'What? He's alive? Where is he?' I was delirious with happiness. Now that they knew he was alive, though they were afraid of what had become of him. My happiness was clouded with fear," remembers Salima. "All night, horrible thoughts bothered me. At times I would picture him in my mind, his fingers broken and his arms and legs cut off. Other times I would see his radiant face with blank holes in place of his shining eyes. It was agonizing. Mummy would suddenly startle. Sometimes she would start crying quietly. At last the night passed and we set off for Lailpur. At Lailpur jail, the superintendent asked Alys how many children she had. Alys pointed at Salima and Moneeza and said, "Those 2 girls." "No boys?" asked the man sympathetically. Alys shook her head. She was used to this particular subcontinental mindset. Boys were considered a family's treasure, while girls were at best a burden to be borne gracefully. Salima remembered the visit in perfect detail. They seated us in a narrow room overlooking the prison courtyard. Those few moments were hard to bear. Even today, my mind goes numb thinking about it. I looked up, and beyond the iron bars, I saw a man in a shirt and trouser walking towards us. His gait was leisurely, swaying from side to side. I shook my mother. "Mummy, he's coming!" She was so quiet, she never came to the window. "How is he?" she asked. "He looks okay," I said, and then started a running commentary. He was wearing dark glasses, and I suddenly remembered the rumors about him being blinded, and I went quiet. A few moments later, he entered. With one hand, he took off his glasses and smiled at me. "Hello, darling," he said as he embraced Mummy. I kept looking into his eyes. They were fine, even brighter than before. I was quiet as I felt the tears well up in my eyes. I didn't want him to see me crying, but it was useless. We embraced and hugged each other and talked and hugged each other some more. "What have you done?" I asked him. "Nothing," he said.
Thank you, Ms. Navid Shahzad. That was beautiful, and thanks, Ali, for writing that amazing piece of art. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can keep your questions very brief, we can try and pack more. But request you to please say your name, introduce yourself, and ask a very brief question. We can do 2, but if you ask short ones, we can do 3. Here, please. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Homer Price. I've come from London, and I'm very touched by this biography, Love and Revolution. And I'd like to invite you to come to London, and I will personally arrange a launch in the House of Commons.
Well, we are all honored. Thank you.
We love affairs in London. We have the Faiz Mela every year, of course.
Next question right there. Actually, yahan pe please. Thank you.
I wish to introduce myself as a great admirer of Faiz, not only as a poet, but also as a person. And I wonder, you see, this biography which you have written, has it pointed out any negative or bad points of Faiz? Because otherwise, you see, perhaps it would reduce into a hagiography, talking only about the good points of Faiz. Because I think, in fact, I had done a lot of research on Faiz, and I somehow think that he did not have any negative points as a person.
Thank you for your question. I had this question the other day also, and it is difficult to find anything bad to write about Faiz. It's very difficult. But I did find something. So it was actually a chapter in a book by Ralph Russell, not on Faiz. It was a book on subcontinental poetry, and Russell Saab, of course, was a staunch communist to the end, and of course a great author and literature. So that chapter, and I've referenced it in the book, I've mentioned it in the book, was actually a criticism of Faiz from the left, so to speak. criticizing things like perhaps he wasn't committed enough to the leftist cause and so on and so forth. So you can read about it, it's in there. The reference is in the book, and the entire chapter is available online on Fran Pritchett's website. You can search for it. And so I couldn't find anything, any negative thing that somebody said about him personally, and I think I would, if I had found something, I would, of course, you can find lots of things. Many Maulvi Sahiban said many bad things about him, but I'm not going to write that in the book. So is qisam ki, if you find something like that, then perhaps one ought to wait, and if it's objective, like Aisha said, one can mention it. And I agree with you. I mentioned that earlier. The purpose of writing the book was not to write an uncritical sort of hagiography of Faiz. So but there is something about his poetry, his ideology, something like that. But you'll have to dig through the book to find it. Can we take a question from Madam Salma here?
Thank you, Ali. It is a pleasure to hear you. I'm just wondering, are there many moods that Faiz reflects, from शीशों का मसीहा कोई नहीं और दरबार वतन में जाने वाले एक दिन जाएंगे. What is it that you see as a psychiatrist? What strength is there that you could find that made Faiz Faiz?
This was a central question. My psychiatrists and psychologist friends, some of them are here. So, and of course, this is a question that sort of intrigues all of us in terms of what really makes a man or a woman who he or she is, especially a man or woman who's accomplished something great in their lives, because that's the way we would all like to be, right? We would like to know what it was that made them who they are. There's not, after writing the book and after reading about Faiz and everything, there's not any one thing that makes the person who they are. I think it's lots of things, and I think I've mentioned some in the epilogue or something like that. I actually mentioned in the foreword, I'm a psychiatrist, but it's not a psychological biography of Faiz. But if some of that comes through, it's because that's what I do from day to day. But commitment, passion, dedication. There was some mention earlier about, Aisha had asked a question to Nasreen Appa here about what was different about Alys's feminism as opposed to, garden variety feminism. And I think an important part of her feminism, her struggle for women's and children's rights, was that her struggle was originating from and integrally tied to the struggle for human rights, not women's rights and children's rights as divorced from human rights in general. So that does make a difference. So passion, dedication, all those kinds of things. Madam, you need to read the book, and then we can have a discussion about whether we can figure out who Faiz actually was. So,
talking about reading the book, by the way, Over My Shoulder is available outside at Sangimil, and this book, Love and Revolution, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, is available at Liberty Books. Dr. Ali Madeeh Hashmi will be signing them this evening also, if you want to catch him, but if you're lucky, catch him right outside here. The books are also available. We'll take one last question, please, right there in the back.
I'm a teacher and student of literature, and what I love about Faiz is the blend of romance and realism in his poetry. How would he talk about his poetry? What did he say about his poetry?
You'll have to read the book to find out. I think the organizers want us to wind up here. So,
ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Dr. Ali Madeeh Hashmi, thank you very much. Navid Shahzad, thank you so much. Many thanks.